PBS and NPR were under fire yesterday on Capitol Hill. The DOGE subcommittee held a hearing to discuss whether the two networks deserve government funding, since Republicans say the outlets are too left-leaning.
NPR's CEO made an interesting admission and also walked back some past statements. Let's watch.
Now you are here managing NPR, which is in part federally funded. Can we expect that you will bring the same lack of reverence for truth to your management of NPR?
Thank you, Congressman. First of all, I do want to say that NPR acknowledges that we were mistaken in failing to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story more aggressively and sooner. Our current editorial leadership.
In Wuhan?
We recognize that we were reporting at the time, but we acknowledge that the new CIA evidence is worthy of coverage and have covered it.
Let me ask you, why did you call President Trump a fascist and a deranged racist sociopath in 2020?
Congressman, I appreciate the opportunity to address this. I regret those tweets. I would not tweet them again today. They represented a time where I was reflecting on something that I believe that the president had said rather than who he is. I don't presume that anyone is a racist.
You don't believe anyone is a racist?
I don't start by presuming anyone is a racist, sir.
Former senior business editor at NPR, Uri Berliner, has some advice for the outlet. He wrote a piece in the Free Press titled, "NPR should refuse to take federal funds. The broadcaster needs to stop pretending it's a network for all of America and become the progressive institution it truly wants to be." Berliner had spoken out last year about how NPR's staunch left-leaning editorial stance led to the outlet losing its way. Joining us now to discuss more is Berliner himself. Welcome to Rising.
Hi.
Great to have you with us. I really appreciated the things you've written for the Free Press about your time at NPR and the biases that you say you witnessed in terms of failing to cover two of the stories, in fact, that were mentioned at that hearing. First, I want to get your reaction to what you saw in the hearing yesterday. It seemed to me like Katherine Maher was quite aware of the heightened scrutiny she's getting and wanted to backpedal from a lot of statements she'd made in her personal life on social media. What was your takeaway from what you saw?
Well, I think what you saw was that Republicans certainly aggressively interrogating and sometimes attacking NPR, less so PBS, and the Democrats really talking about children's television mostly, and Big Bird and Elmo, and the coverage for rural stations. I think, the heart of it was the back and forth between the Republicans and Katherine Maher. And, she did acknowledge that NPR had failed to adequately cover the Hunter Biden laptop story. I was happy to see that. And, she did struggle to reconcile, to explain away some of her social media history. I think there was pretty tough questioning there from the Republicans, and that was I think the toughest part of the hearing for Maher.
And your point is that, look, she, and I agree with this, she has First Amendment rights too. She has free speech. She can spout off on whatever she thinks, and I can criticize it or disagree with it, as can Republicans. But is someone of this mindset the right person to run a news organization that receives federal funding and thus, we would probably argue, has some obligation to, if not exactly represent the views of all Americans, however crazy or extreme, to at least have some level of understanding or like social ability to relate to and discuss in a not so extreme or biased way? And I think that's what she failed to do, versus her, given her history of tweeting. And then you say, like, if that's going to be the case, then she can just be the head of a left-wing organization that is not taxpayer supported.
Right. I mean, I agree with you completely. I think, given that NPR has always and increasingly has been under scrutiny for perceptions that it leans left, to hire someone with that very hyper-progressive history of social media that sort of stands out. I think that probably not the best way to lead NPR into the future. And my point is that I think it just would be healthier all around if NPR said, look, the amount of federal funding we receive is fairly minimal. We're going to give it up. we're going to do something that no one does in American life, which just says, no, we don't need the federal funds, and go off and raise money from, loyal listeners, big donors, left-leaning foundations, and say, we have a progressive outlook. That's who we are. We are, we're going to try and report fairly, but we acknowledge what we are. I think it would be better all around. They wouldn't have to deal with Marjorie Taylor Greene and kind of really uncomfortable days like yesterday, and there would be a new direction for NPR.
It's interesting, this discussion. I had always thought of NPR as a fairly thoughtful news outlet. But you, sir, you were there 25 years. And so I assume that your thinking about the organization evolved over that time. When did you start to have concerns? And talk us through what that looked like. How did that play out while you were there in this relatively senior position?
Right. Well, I think it was notable right after in the 2016 election. I do remember when Trump unexpectedly won, there was a lot of sadness, almost despair in the newsroom, and a sense of shock. I don't think NPR was alone among legacy media institutions, but it just was very striking that we had been out of touch with the country and the mood. And I wrote then to senior managers saying, look, hey, we missed this. We need to be more humble. We need to connect more with the rest of the country. We kind of we were sort of out of touch with what was going on. And I think that was really the first time that I expressed myself. And then over the years, during COVID, during the social justice uprising, during a lot of when the transgender ideology issue became a big deal, especially during the lockdowns and the policies that evolved out of the pandemic, I think the network just moved in a more progressive direction, and it was quite rigid. I thought it was just not really open to a lot of different perspectives, and I became quite vocal about stories I thought we were missing, or really the necessity to get more viewpoints into the newsroom, which I thought were lacking.
Yeah, this notion, this idea that there was a lot of groupthink and hostility to different perspectives, a lot of settling immediately on actually debatable questions like where COVID came from, what the origins of the Hunter Biden laptop story were, that it was just, it's like the memo went out immediately by kind of elite progressive thinkers that, no, this is how you're supposed to feel about this. Don't ask questions about it. That's something that's been pretty well discussed and established by now. And I often think when I do have insights into very progressive spaces in media, which I do occasionally from networking with such people, what I'm often struck by is that there's sometimes not even an awareness of the bias is not even so maybe as straightforwardly malicious as many conservatives think. It's literally like they're surrounded by people who all agree on this, and it wouldn't even, it's not like they're saying, oh yeah, this is the alternate perspective, let's make sure we crush that. Like it's not even occurring to them. I'm sure there's a similar phenomenon that goes in all sorts of ideologically captured space from right to left. Is that what you noticed?
Absolutely, and I think I wrote about that in the Free Press essay. NPR is not a place where anyone is malicious or openly tries to destroy another point of view. It's a really cordial place for the most part, but I think one reason is that so many people agree with themselves comfortably ideologically, and getting different perspectives or challenging perspectives is just rarely done. So I think that they're not particularly often not well equipped to deal with different perspectives or challenges to sort of progressive narratives they put forth. And I think sometimes it seems they're kind of caught off guard when somebody says, hey, look, you missed that. It's unfair. It's unbalanced. You ignored the data or whatever. And I think you're absolutely right that it's not malicious. It's more like it's a question of an echo chamber.
So some members of Congress who are supportive of continued federal funding for NPR have argued that it is a critical component of local news media. Senator Welch of Vermont is one of those people making the rounds saying that today. Do you feel like there's a fair argument there? And what do you think is the role of NPR in what we can all agree, I think, is shrinking local media environment?
Right, and I've argued this before that there are, especially in rural areas, like the Mississippi Delta or West Virginia, for example, and Alaska, local public radio stations are really important, and they do provide an important service, especially as obviously small town newspapers are disappearing. And I do agree with that. I think there, could possibly be some way where those stations continue to be supported. NPR says we're not gonna charge them for our programming, because the way it works is that the local stations pay to acquire the NPR shows like Morning Edition. NPR could just say, look, we're not going to charge them, or we'll reduce their fees. We don't need the federal money, but keep the support for local stations, the ones, especially the ones that are in so-called news deserts.
Uri Berliner, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. Take care.
Next up, another university student detained by the police. We'll discuss. Stay tuned.